Hi friends, welcome to the NPTEL course Leadership for India Inc. Practical Concepts and Constructs. We are in week 11 discussing leadership philosophies. This week we will focus on leadership sensibilities. This series of 5 lectures on leadership philosophies would be, as most philosophies are, a little abstract and a little not immediately relatable to what we see around us. However, like again, all philosophical concepts, these are extremely relevant and these are actually carried out in practice by leaders and followers. So, with that perspective in mind, please listen to the lectures and also go through the materials. As I said, this lecture is on leadership sensibilities. A summary is presented now. A leader has to be both sensible and sensitive. We have earlier considered the importance of leader engagement as well as the facets of good communication, including empathy. This lecture considers the need for a leader to be both sensible and sensitive to ensure responsible leadership in the company. In today's fast-paced, competitive world, slow, considered, deliberative, consensual decision making and diligent communication seem out of place, yet responsible leadership requires this. Despite the existence of many formal organizational forums and processes, leaders are often faced with barriers to genuine feedback due to vested interests. When I say vested interests, I do not mean in any derogatory term. Interests that get perpetuated in organizations due to structural, process, and people reasons. Leaders need to follow the law of large numbers in deciding on the cross-sectional samples of the organizational team they seek to interact with, the goal being inclusive representation. To be able to do that, a leader must be both sensible in terms of his or her communication and sensitive in terms of the impact of his or her communication to be perceived as a genuine and responsible leader. Feedback, especially to the leaders, is a great enabler of responsible leadership. Many times a leader does not get to meet or engage with employees who need to be met or engaged the most. As a routine, meetings are arranged or decided based on a perception of people who matter. Leader sensibility and sensitivity are critical. Good governance in a company is dependent on good feedback. Leaders should seek good feedback deliberately. We will discuss the regulation for responsible leadership. Prudential governance is the prime responsibility of leadership. Prudential means as per rules, codes, and ethical values. That is dependent on the virtuous feedback system that exists in the company. It is a rarity too. Governments and agencies concerned with good governance in this context have come up with two ideas to facilitate responsible leadership: corporate governance on one hand and the stipulation of key managerial personnel in a company on the other hand. Corporate governance is an improvement to the long-standing mechanism of board governance with increased focus on independent directors and criteria of good governance. Key managerial personnel concept brought in with the new Companies Act 2013 means certain employees of the company at the very senior levels who are considered accountable to the boards and regulators besides the CEO. With these, we have additional accountabilities to the shareholders and investors. Annual shareholders meetings as well as listing agreements with stock exchanges govern corporate governance. Quarterly calls with analysts and the focus of stock markets on material developments also help corporate governance. These, of course, add multiple extra layers of watchfulness to keep the CEOs on focus. However, much needs to be done internally. The communication process have to work perfectly fine both ways, from the leader to the followers and from the followers to the leaders, so that the nature of governance that is happening in the company is well understood by the leader as well as the followers. Just because there are mechanisms of corporate governance and stipulation of key managerial personnel, we cannot assume that responsible leadership would automatically happen. Let's not conclude that sensibility and sensitivity are both assured in the contemporary leadership governance system automatically. Probably the reality is the otherwise situation. There can be no better leadership governance than self-governance, for which the need is for authentic and timely feedback. This lecture focuses on how leaders can seek and obtain authentic feedback from the teams. The lecture also will focus on how leaders who are no longer in harness, that is, leaders who are no longer in active service, can also contribute to ensuring good feedback mechanisms for the current leadership of the company. Speed is a dominant theme for the modern day leader. A modern day leader is no longer like a monarch who commands everything and everyone he or she sees. Monarchy in the olden days had a very structured system of regular court and advisors in statecraft and governance, in Sanskrit, Rajaniti and Rajadharma. Today, while structures, process and values do exist, speed derails these. Along with monarchies, a few of which misused and disregarded such systems too, these deliberative, slow-ticking systems of regal court have also disappeared. There is a lot of emphasis on performance accountability. In that context, the contemporary leader needs to be both sensible in how he leads his followers and interacts with other stakeholders, and also sensitive to how his followers as well as other stakeholders respond to his leadership. We cannot, of course, wish away the aggression of time that happens. But this advice is well merited given the premium corporations have to place on hiring aggressive leaders who can fulfill ambitious targets and make businesses more competitive than ever. When a leader conforms to this fast forward template, and more so when he or she happens to be a newly hired leader, he or she actually may be racing ahead of the followers, almost like an engine delinked from the carriages. There is a great need for leaders to be deliberative, accountable, while making businesses competitive. What are the forums which are available for leaders? Leaders do realize that they need to keep track of and on a reasonable real-time basis understand the things that are happening in the company. Unfortunately, the leader is perched alone at the top of the organizational pyramid, and it is difficult for him to understand the goings on at various levels of the organization. At the bottom of the pyramid, you tend to have free horizontal communication with executives interacting very freely. When you come to the middle layer, there tends to be formal, limited, horizontal and vertical communication. And when it comes to the top, everything is calibrated, titrated, and it is cautious, constrained communication that happens. So with so much at stake in terms of perceived performance, leaders find it difficult to ease up or let their colleagues be open about how they are performing. When we say they, the leaders themselves. All organizational structures are hierarchy driven, more so in India. Formal interactions are conformity driven rather than openness driven. And even in organizations that are rooted in developed countries, it is observed that while interactions seem to be open, underlying agendas are often driven by influential leaders. While an intensely and intrinsically astute and sensitive leader may manage to pick up signals from the various meetings and interactions, the odds are that such random pickings are not the same as structured feedback to leaders. I have in my previous lecture talked about 6 sensory faculties which the leader must have and must develop to be able to pick up signals from various points and from various people of the organization. Even when the leader has those sensory faculties, it always pays to have structured mechanisms and structured methodologies to get such feedback. The engagement mechanisms are a whole range that is available theoretically. Leadership practice has evolved to put in place certain mechanisms to make leaders sensible and sensitive to going-ons in the company. From regular departmental meetings to digital conferences, a whole range of options exist. From one-on-one conversations with individual employees to town halls with large groups of employees, a range of options, physical, digital, and mixed, are available for leaders to ascertain how they are doing. However, we must look at the substantive part of these deliberations rather than stylistic part of the deliberations. That is, as with most things, substance is more important than style and content is more relevant than form. This requires that interactions cannot be random but should be statistically significant. And what is the meaning of statistical significance as far as the meetings and the feedback mechanisms are concerned? If leaders do not appreciate the importance of the science of statistics and the art of organizational behavior in structuring interactive sessions and receiving feedback. Such interactions cannot be of real help. Formal written feedback could always exist. Examples, appraisals, or a leader can ask for feedback on various issues. There could be open but freewheeling thematic discussions. There could also be selective dipsticks. But these also need to be deployed skillfully and with relevance. Statistical science is important to ensure quantitative representativeness of interactions, while organizational behavior is needed to facilitate the qualitative integrity of responses. So we have to take into account internal organizational processes. If required, we can even go in for third party surveys. We can have a combination of external and internal processes, but it is necessary for a leader to understand the happenings in the company. Many times, leaders engage top level companies such as Egon Zehnder or Hendricks and Struggles to have an understanding of the morale of the organization. Senior people from such organizations come in and talk to various leaders and managers and understand the cultural strength as well as the competency strength of the organizations. This is one way to get feedback formally with external third party assistance. But I am trying to talk through this lecture about the ways and means the leader has to get such feedback internally. There are many barriers to feedback. In a modern corporation, these are really aplenty. These relate to how organization structures and processes have evolved to ensure systematization and predictability. However independent a leader may seem to be, he tends to be a prisoner of his immediate team or a few confidential advisors. For example, hierarchy, departmentalization tells the leader how to behave with the rest of the organization. Only in certain situations does the leader get to savor the freedom of open interaction with the larger organization. It could happen when annual events take place or site visits take place. There is so much execution emphasis and there is so much accountability emphasis that there is little time for bilateral or multilateral discourse. Instructions are always top down, and performance reviews as well are always top down. Execution imperatives overtake all other needs of leadership. This substantially leads to leaders sidestepping some of the other important qualitative requirements of their critical role of seeking and receiving feedback. The new leader approaches have ever expanding canvases, ever deepening exploration, and never relenting goal pursuit. So the leaders of today are in a hurry to do more, do it more intensively, and do it ever faster. Under such circumstances, nobody seems to have time for orderly feedback and deliberative mechanisms. I'm not saying that they are absent, but I am saying they are not available to the extent required to ensure responsible leadership. The forums the broad organizations have are limited. Members of the broader organization do not usually have the ability to communicate amongst themselves or with the leaders appropriately in the forums provided, because most forums tend to be overwhelmingly goal and execution focused. Even during pre-COVID times, if you really ask any member of an organization how many times the department meets, how many times the leader addresses all the members of a department, forget about all members of the organization, the answer would be maybe once in a month, maybe once in 2 months, and in some cases it could be even once in 6 months. That itself indicates that the forums for constructive regular feedback are lacking in organizations. The available forums, which are limited in scope and longish in time, offer little opportunity and time for open discussion on latent issues. The meetings are so few and so far between that the team members hardly have the chance to build rapport that can enable open feedback to the leaders. The consequence of a leader meeting the team members every 6 months or even every 1 year is that people do not have the kind of relationship that should be there for people to openly talk. That itself is a big limitation. In organizations where the CEO relies on a compact leadership team or executive council, All of the above could become the barriers to feedback. The question that would arise is that when you have an SLT and when the SLT is expected to take the feedback from the rest of the organization through its hierarchy of leaders and managers, why should there be a need for the CEO to reach up to any other level of the organization than the SLT itself? Therefore, he is a prisoner of the SLT, so to say. The challenge of open feedback is compounded exponentially when the leader is authoritarian and egoistic. Even participative leaders have the kind of constraints which we have talked about earlier. If the leader is authoritarian and egoistic, it is in his nature that he would not take any feedback. In such cases, the board of directors has the responsibility to mentor and coach such a leader to display certain basic levels of openness to feedback before any of the interactive sessions by the leader with his team are planned and assumed to be leader to be effective. So leadership goals, leadership processes and leadership forums have to be brought into alignment to enable good feedback. Why do forums act as barriers? Organizational structures are made up of conservative departments and established hierarchy also erects barriers to feedback. Silo structures and mindsets worsen the barriers to feedback. Departments and their leaders have a knack of constraining open sessions and regulating otherwise constructive feedback. If the feedback pertains to, say, morale, Human Resources Department would quickly volunteer to assure everyone that they are on the top of it. If someone worries about growing capital expenditure, the Business Planning Department would say that all the concerns have been factored in, we have taken care of the payback periods, and the organization should rest assured that the capital expenditure is being spent wisely and without any issue. If technology connectivity and productivity were desired, Information Technology Department would say that I have a phased program for IT modernization because that's all the budget I get and I'm unable to change the legacy systems. Therefore, the departments could get defensive and could develop a vested interest in conveying that everything is all right in their respective areas. In contrast, at times, even if interactive sessions are organized, they may end up as feel-good interactions with little surfacing of issues and with little advocacy of solutions. Behavioral scientists aver that having a right organizational culture is essential for communication sessions to succeed, especially if open and frank bottom-up feedback is desired. If barriers to feedback are to be overcome, leaders need to meet the right people with the right processes and in right frequency. A combination of statistical science and organizational behavior, which I call statistical behavior in this lecture, is required. What is a framework of statistical behavior? A good leader has to be proactive and engaged beyond goals and performance to identify what leadership needs holistically and emerge as the leader who stays true to the tenets of genuine leadership. The constraints on the leader in the way of wholesome engagement and a path forward is presented below. There are 8 basic constraints. 1. The way the organizations are designed, it is lonely at the top for the leader. There are also hierarchical pressures. You can only engage with certain forums and not certain other forums. There are vested interests that develop in organizations over a period of time, and they provide somewhat incorrect feedback. People would also have hidden agendas, and what is really true would not come in. Like if the idea is to expand the sites so that the manufacturing leader would have greater power in the organization, that is a sort of a hidden agenda. While there could be numbers which suggest that there is need for capacity expansion, the other aspects of making the capacity work better would not be considered under such situations, and there is a governance issue there. There could also be party lines. That is, people belong to certain leadership styles. Somebody could be a cost leader, somebody could be a differentiation leader, somebody could be a people leader, and based on the party lines of the leaders, the feedback also moves in or moves up that way. There is also a culture of servility that could be there in several organizations. Absolutely, there won't be any whimper of dissent or whimper of discussion in such organizations. In some organizations, by a cultural phenomenon again, People are willing to have conversations, but such conversations tend to be very silent, muted kind of conversations. And people also have the habit of shying away from issues, hoping that they would be resolved by themselves. And that shying away from issues could take place from the leader side or from the followers side. Leaders should become consummate in engaging with the organization, even if in limited numbers, for statistically representative feedback. For that, leaders should adopt the law of large numbers for representation of the universe. Leaders should be sensible in communication and sensitive to the impact of communication. Leaders should be able to recognize even muted feedback. Again, I recall the six sensory faculties and advise the aspirant managers and leaders to develop those faculties so that they can be both sensible and sensitive. Statistical behavior is the behavioral skill of a leader that is backed by statistical science that encourages responses of members to leadership style and corporate course of action. Let's try to define statistical behavior. We have the foundations of culture, we have the pillars of training, we have the canopy of leadership, yet the rank and file of the organization tends to behave in a random manner when it comes to expressing opinions. If you have a town hall and if you ask certain questions, the responses are likely to be very random rather than thoughtful. And the people who would represent the speakers would also be randomly from different situations. One department could provide 10 responses, whereas another few departments could be totally silent. So this randomness or the non-representativeness of the feedback system is a great deterrent to corporate governance. Many times the forums are organized without taking into consideration the statistical representativeness of the sample to the universe. If you are having a town hall in which the manufacturing, let's put it this way, if you are in an organization or at a site which has the following representation: 1,000 people from manufacturing are working in that site, 10 people from supply chain are working at the site, 2 people from finance are working in the site, 20 people from HR are working at the site, as an example. Then the proportionality should be to the numbers which exist there. But if on the other hand only manufacturing people are represented in the forum, or if all the HR people are represented but no manufacturing person is represented, then there is a skew. So we need to have statistical representativeness of the sample to the universe whenever meeting fora are decided. The participants for the physical sessions, when they are selected without statistical rigor but with bias of comfort in selection, either by rank or acceptability, there would be further skew in the way the meetings would take place. Even leaders themselves do not seem to appreciate the importance of statistically scientific selection and managerially artful communication to obtain representative feedback. In this context, there are 2 laws that are relevant in this context. The first is the law of small numbers, to which most leaders fall prey. It triggers leaders to come to hasty generalizations and quick judgments based only on initial interactions and or incomplete, incoherent data sets. They just take a small dipstick and believe that the dipstick is representative of the universe. Obviously, it is a logical fallacy to assume that small interactions can reflect the collective viewpoint of the larger organization. For effective corporate governance, the leader must seek and obtain authentic feedback from a total cross-section of the organization. Let us look at the law of large numbers. It is a statistically supported principle that states that the larger the sample, the greater its representativeness in reflecting the opinion of the universe. Given the randomness that is inherent in organizations, larger numbers of employee interactions are essential to balance extremes of opinions and enable inclusivity of a broader representation of the universe. This is one of the reasons why I focused on having total employee meetings, not just meeting of a few members whenever I visited a site, because that would provide a great opportunity to remove the randomness and bring forward the representativeness of the sample that exists. So open to all forums are the way to go to ensure that the law of large numbers works. Second, representativeness. As data points from a large sample become available, Convergence towards a representative collective viewpoint emerges. And then the interaction discipline. The selection of participants by the law of large numbers alone is not sufficient. Leaders must have the discipline to interact in consonance with the composition of the large sample. When you look at a press conference that is handled by, let's say, the Reserve Bank of India governor, the way the governor goes across various media representatives in such a manner that both the national and regional media get an appropriate say, and also look at different channels and let them ask different questions. That also provides greater representativeness. So the experience of the leader in seeking feedback is extremely important. Leaders must touch base with each participant of the sample for feedback. In the absence of that, the leaders would be introducing the travesty of small numbers even in a sample of large numbers. Therefore, sampling even in law of large numbers requires individual interactions. Statistical behavior requires a behavioral skill on part of the leader to bring out from the team members their multiple reactions to the leadership style and corporate course of action. While statistical design is important, sensibility and sensitivity on the part of the leader are also equally important. Let's try to define these terms a little more. Oftentimes we think that sensibility and sensitivity are one and the same. While there is considerable overlap, there are subtle but important differences too. Sensibility is the quality of having an acute perception or responsiveness as to what an event or statement would mean to the stakeholders, especially in terms of emotions. The ability to experience and understand deep feelings, that is, the leader would a priori emotionally think the kind of impact the statement would have on the members who are participating in the meeting. Sensitivity, on the other hand, is the expression of one's sensibility levels. It is the ability to fathom the depth of emotions and feelings of others. Even if your statement is sensible, you should be in a position to measure or feel the impact of this statement through your sensitivity to the feelings and emotions of others. It is also the capability to calibrate one's statements and actions, keeping in view the impact they would have on others. Although sensibility is used in the realms of art and literature, it is quite applicable to business and commercial activities too. While sensibility is grounded in rationality, sensitivity has emotional touch. Sensitivity is an essential foundation for being empathetic towards others. A sensible leader makes good judgments based on reason and experience rather than on emotion. A sensitive leader would be conscious of how his judgments, even if they were sensible, would be perceived and experienced by others. Therefore, there is an emotional shade to the sensitive leader. A leader who is both sensible and sensitive would be a responsible leader because he or she would understand the kinds of statements that must be made and the kind of responses the statements are likely to get and are in fact getting in practice during the meeting. So the responsible leader would recognize in such a process any oddities that impact good governance. What is the interplay? Let's take a HR example. The interplay between sensibility and sensitivity is illustrated by a typical decision on right sizing the organization. Many times organizations experience the need for right sizing. And the right sizing doesn't mean across the board reduction of people. One particular site could be experiencing right sizing, but the other one could be upsizing. We don't know. And right sizing could be usually on the downward side, which makes things painful. Post-COVID related lockdown, businesses and individuals have faced this grim reality even more. Sensibility and sensitivity are critical. What is a sensible decision in this case? A company may withhold organizational expansion, even if it was promised earlier, or even undertake downsizing during business downturn. It may take the decision as that is the only sensible option, being fully cognizant of the emotional impact. A company took a decision to reduce its corporate employees drastically in the just acquired company. Although the company could have sought increased contributions from the employees, it chose to reduce cost by downsizing. We can argue whether the decision was sensible or not sensible. It would be sensible if the company has got no other plans for the acquired company and it found the people far too many. On the other hand, if the company had got plans to further expand the business through the acquired company, it would not be a sensible decision. It would be more sensible to create more value or to extract more value from the extra manpower that is available on hand at this point of time. So the sensibility of decision is varying contextually, but a decision has to be made with lot of sensibility in mind. Sensitive communication. The way that decision is communicated in terms of clarity, frequency, and genuineness, however, requires considerable sensitivity. Sensitivity to the emotions the decision actually stokes when it is announced and to the responses that could arise. These are two important aspects. This company, which took a decision to downsize, communicated the decision calling the people who were fired to a 5-star hotel and began delivering the termination letters in the luxury ambience. So look at the incongruity. You are asking people to go away, lose their long-term sustenance, even though some kind of buffer period is provided in terms of the notice period and also in terms of the separation pay. In spite of that, the whole idea of getting separated from a company being delivered under luxury ambience is somewhat incongruous. It could be seen definitely by the employees as an insensitive way of communication, and it would not be seen that way by only those employees who are impacted. The word will go around across the organization and everybody will think that this management is insensitive. The reality is also that it is impossible for a leader to make decisions that are sensible to all, but being sensitive to how they impact the affected individuals and conveying the decision sensibly and sensitively helps the communication process immensely. This is one example of the interplay of sensibility and sensitivity with HR as the background. Let us take the interplay with a project example. A major investment decision may evoke positive sensibility and sensitivity internally within the organization, but external investors who tend to be perpetually concerned about the return on their investment could well be uncertain and would therefore need to be handled with sensitivity. So what is a sensible decision from the point of view of a project? It could be build capacity when economy and demand are under a downturn according to the leader, because the leader believes that it helps the company to be prepared for the uptick when it happens. While belt tightening could be a normal response to a downturn, for companies which can raise resources, building of new projects and adding of capacity could be a sensible decision even in a downturn. But the sensitive communication should be different. The way the decision is communicated in terms of relevance, futurism, and assurance requires considerable sensitivity. Sensitivity to the emotions the decision actually stokes when additional capital expenditure is announced in recessionary conditions and to the responses that could arise. For example, when the employees are provided with no increments, the company announcing a major new project involving hundreds of crores of capital expenditure could be seen as being dichotomous, could be seen to be disingenuous. So we need to convey such decisions with sensitivity. While belt tightening could be a normal response to a downturn, for companies which can raise resources, building of new projects and adding of capacity could be a sensible decision even in a downturn, as I said. But the leader must be sensitive to appreciate that employees who are impacted in the downturn could be unhappy with such capital expenditure. The leader must be sensitively articulate about the futuristic nature of this investment that is being made and how that would be beneficial to the employees in future, even though their current salaries are being held back. The theory of statistical behavior of organizations discussed so far in this lecture helps leaders in the process of acceptance and effectiveness. Also, leaders who are silent when in harness or out of it can convey a lot too. So far we have discussed how a leader gets proactive, gets sensible and gets sensitive to get the feedback from a whole cross section of the organization, and we will use those inputs for enhancing the corporate governance in an organization. That is the leadership belief and that is the leadership philosophy. However, a leader typically would have several leaders who are senior to the leader, who are on the verge of retirement or who have actually retired but are still available for counsel. There is so much feedback that could be available from such leaders as well. And such leaders, when they become silent, the organization is losing their wise counsel and the sensibility and sensitivity that comes with the decades of wisdom they carry. So let's talk about wise leadership communication as the other side of the coin. We commenced with how leaders could vary in their communication styles but could be effective communicators regardless based on sensibility and sensitivity. Now let's focus on wise communication by leaders. Leaders tend to be forceful speakers. Speeches and presentations connect them to their followers and influence them. While passionate speeches inspire the followers and sway non-followers, it is the clarity of the theme and the on-ground action that develops credibility and trust. Roaring speeches impose and embed a line of thinking in the listeners with a boost of adrenaline, while tranquil speeches develop and integrate persuasion and reflection. Nations, societies, and organizations are moved less by mountains of words and inspired more by succinct messages of lasting value. That's why great speakers have their full stops and commas when they are delivering their speeches, because they want the message to be absorbed, assimilated, and reflected upon. The persuasive and reflective leader achieves a long lasting positive transformation of people. People are moved less by a leader who sounds and acts lofty and larger than life, and people are inspired more by a wise leader who feels like one of them. Organizations must appreciate that leaders, regardless of their working, are institutional embodiments of intellect and wisdom, and they need to be continuously tapped for guidance and inspiration. I am spending time on why leaders should have good speech styles or good communication styles, because it is their styles that would endear them to the next crop of leaders and would make those leaders seek their advice, their counsel. But if the leaders have some other types of speech delivery or communication delivery, the newer sets of leaders will think that it is good riddance, that those older leaders have gone away and there's no need to come back to them. So it is incumbent on the senior leaders also to have sensibility, sensitivity, and authenticity in the way they communicate, in the way they speak, in the way they build rapport. And leaders are idolized. Leaders are idolized the world over. They are cheered for every pronouncement and praised for every accomplishment. They are not only adored but also respected. They are feared but also are seen as protectors. Just as a lion strides as the undisputed leader of the animal kingdom, leaders act as the lions that stride in corporate arena. Lion is the leader and the teacher in the animal kingdom. In a jungle which is kind of having several animals of different physical and mental predispositions, lion is one leader who brings everyone together. The physical presence of leaders evokes awe and respect, even as digital technologies have vastly expanded their magical presence across borders and time zones. Leaders have one thing in common: they constantly and consistently articulate. They motivate, inspire, and galvanize their organizations. And we have seen in the previous lecture that it is a pity if they limit this capability only to the SLT. They should reach out to the larger, wider organization. Leaders themselves are mesmerized by the crowds they see. The presence and adulation constantly imbue them with even greater motivation and power to articulate. Whether it is the systematized presidential primaries and election debates in the US or the great rallies of multiple leaders in India, one can see how leaders are at their energetic best to sway the crowds. So, idolization of leaders and leaders getting self idolized are common phenomena. In such a situation, we need to look at wise leadership communication. There are times when speeches become battle cries and exhortations become frenzied roars. A roar, as we know, is typically defined as a deep throated cry of a wild animal. It also refers to the racy zoom of an accelerating engine or a speeding vehicle. Roar has connotations of raw power. Many reasons are adduced as to why leaders roar. I am aware of a company which has had tough economic cycles and therefore tough production cycle. The sales used to go down for 3-4 years in continuation. A new leader came. At that time, he implemented certain new plans. Fortunately for him and the company, the economic cycle also started going up. There was happiness all around. That later started getting idolized, and he used to have annual get-togethers of the performance. And when the annual get-togethers used to happen, and when the leader was getting introduced, the images were that of a roaring lion. The continuity of the roaring lion image and the leader striding onto the dais were kind of magical at that point of time, but they were also kind of misplaced artifacts and misplaced behavioral connectivities. So the roar gave the connotation of raw power, but the leader probably did not have the appropriate humility to think that what he has achieved is due to three factors. One, the performance of the company, for which he can take due credit for the new tools he brought in. Performance of the economy, for which we need to be grateful for the wider set of the industries that are functioning and the economic policies. And third, the non-performance of the competitor who got entangled with various other verticals. That humility on the part of the leader as to what he has indeed in practice accomplished and what he has perceptually seen to have accomplished is a key trigger for understanding whether the leader would idolize himself as a lion or not. There are many reasons, taking apart this example, why leaders are adduced and seen as leaders who roar. Firstly, leaders roar to unify their followers to one single mission. It could be electing a party in a democracy or towing a party line in a corporate setting. Secondly, they roar to emerge larger than life. The more they galvanize and electrify their followings, the more they become iconic. Not in all cases, though, as I discussed. Thirdly, leaders need to be heard, often in a dominating manner, even in the face of occasional dissent. The power of eloquent speech overcomes the suggestions of hesitant dissent, if any. Task-oriented leaders, authoritarian leaders, domineering leaders tend to articulate in a roaring manner. Leadership roar becomes over time a theatrical accompaniment of leadership evolution, part inspirational, part evangelistic, part opportunistic, and part narcissistic in its mix, the relative proportion varying from leader to leader. The lore of the roar. Leaders who dramatize their speeches become part of leadership and communications folklore. Steve Ballmer, whose image you can see here, the previous CEO of Microsoft, was known for his theatrics on stage as he made fiery and passionate speeches. That combative style did not exactly translate itself into Microsoft becoming competitive in the marketplace. Mild-mannered Satya Nadella, who succeeded Steve Ballmer, is one who doesn't speak out like Steve Ballmer. He is really soft and affable, but he has been able to change and make Microsoft more relevant, savvy, and competitive. While not all leaders are made by the Ballmer way, many do make extensive use of body movements and raising of voice to lend strength and sharpness to their speeches. They are spurred by softness, but at the same time spurred by body language. We need persuasive networking, not only internally but externally too. Nadella could make a mark and bring many alliances and acquisitions for Microsoft with his disarming and open approach to doing business. Over the last few years, Microsoft made several niche acquisitions, the more prominent one being LinkedIn, and is now poised to make a bigger mark through organic and inorganic initiatives, all by being persuasive rather than combative as Steve Ballmer was, or domineering as the founder Bill Gates was. So that is the softness and the impact of softness that could work for you. There is also a natural elan. For some leaders, the dignity and resonance of their voice comes naturally. The strength of the voice, the diction, the intellect, and the theme, together with passion, could power some of the most inspiring speeches. An example I would cite here from the Indian political situation. In India, N.T. Ramarao or NTR, a legendary actor in Telugu cinema, rode to power in just 9 months after setting up a new political party in the state of Andhra Pradesh in March 1982. He was very much a lion that roared his way with the unmatched strength of his voice, body language, and speech delivery. This is not to say that only roaring speeches make this way. In NTR's case, it was his movie base, including the unmatched stature in Hindu mythological roles, his novel Poll Promises, aimed at the poor and the indigent, and his corruption free image combined to usher him in. It is beyond doubt, however, that the roar in his speeches projected effectively all that he represented and signified. Accomplishment and authenticity must accompany dramatic articulation, as in NTR's case. Let's take the example of our own Prime Minister now. Effective social communication is the platform. In the physical social world, fiery, passionate, and rousing speeches would continue to be the main connector and influencer between the leader and his followers. However, the occasion magnifies the impact even further. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi is known to be an inspiring speaker with a firm grip on content and delivery. He is also an expert in fine tuning his speeches to the occasion, leaving the audience enthralled. He has been highly effective in conveying messages that seek social transformation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi demonstrates that passionate speeches and communications need to be both purposive and purposeful and provide core thematic content and appeal to pull and sway the crowds sustainably. This is another example of effective social communication. Speech is an essence of leadership. Probably not the only essence, but it is one of the important essences of leadership. In the physical world, an impressive speech is one that would connect the leader and the followers and influence the followers. However, the magic of speeches is not permanent. While passionate speeches inspire the followers and sway non followers, it is on ground action that develops credibility and trust. Every speech, doubtless, is made with a message and exhortation. More than the roar, the speech must appeal to the inner self of each listener in terms of logic, clarity, and conviction, and its long term relevance. And that is the core to sustainability. While in the corporate world, presentations supplement or even substitute speeches, it is the personal, physical speech making that counts in the political and administrative world. The ability to speak is therefore the very essence of sustainable leadership. Again, as I said in the last lecture, speech doesn't mean grammar. Speech doesn't mean flourishing words. Speech means having content. Speech means having authenticity. Speech means having sincerity. Speech means the ability to tell a story. That's the important set of hallmarks. The written word has the magic to move minds and hearts. The speech connects individuals even more intensely. The context, content, and the connect that arise from a well delivered speech of great content would be immense. You can look at Robin Sharma now in terms of his conferences, the huge conferences for leadership development he conducts, and the personal connect he has in such public conferences. The success of Robin Sharma, founder of Titan Academy and a globally established leadership coach and author of best-selling books on leadership development, is related to his creative speeches in serial conferences, which are streamed on his webinars, websites, and restreamed on platforms such as YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So it is a kind of structured way of using speech as the essence of his consulting leadership. Passion of persuasion. Roaring speeches are invariably passionate and make listeners also passionate. The effectiveness with which the listeners share the passion depends on the extent to which their minds and hearts stay connected with the speech makers. These gurus, that is, gurus such as J. Krishnamurti, Sri Ravi Shankar, Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev, they are philosophers. They are able to connect to the followers, connect with the followers because of their speeches. The speeches which such famous gurus make do not roar. They do not race like mighty waterfalls, but they cruise like a tranquil river. Such tranquil river type speeches prompt reflection. Roaring speeches tend to make people to act, whether to vote in an election or to execute in a program. Tranquil but impactful speeches tend to make people think, reflect, and transform themselves. Tranquil speeches, even when together, make a lot of impact. Roaring speeches move people collectively without as much as of individual thinking that should ideally take place, whereas tranquil speeches change individual thinking in a collective setting as it must ideally happen. Roaring speeches make individuals to act in the direction that is being specified, whereas tranquil speeches make individuals to think, change their collective viewpoints, and then have a lasting way of doing things. That is the difference between roaring speeches and tranquil speeches. Roaring speeches impose and embed a line of thinking in the listeners with a boost of adrenaline, while tranquil speeches develop and integrate a line of thinking in them with interplay of persuasion and reflection. So, what is the native characteristic of the leader communication discipline? Delivering a roaring speech or a tranquil speech is not one of a dynamic or of changing choice for a leader. It tends to be a native characteristic, an intrinsic characteristic, and a uniquely attributable characteristic of a leader, and it has 4 parts. Leaders must remember that persuasion needs to be at the core of the change or reinforcement, as the case may be. Domineering is not the theme. Persuasion should be the theme. Leaders must not only be excited to make passionate speeches but be committed to be persuasive with their followers. When collectively present on a dais or in a forum, only those who can be passionate must be passionate, and those who are tranquil or composed by nature should keep to their style. Competitive speech making by leaders of a collective leadership group tends to be a disaster in organizational communication. So, the leader's speech responsibility is one of self-discipline as well. Reflecting the native characteristics strongly in the speeches by a leader is not about idolizing or prioritizing the leader. It is more about reflecting genuineness as a leadership team. So, if the leaders have those kinds of excellent attributes in terms of communication, messaging, speech delivering, and connecting with the followers, they can be seen to have acquired silent wisdom once they move out of the organization. They had articulate wisdom as long as they were in position, but when they move out of the positions, the wisdom turns silent. With time, there must come an inflection point when the line of a leader may not wish to or cannot roar as a matter of routine. In today's materialistic world, a silent line is perceived as a spent force. It need not be so. The line could get reclusive, given that the roar signals its own internal pride. The inability to roar makes aged lions recluse, and it is so even in the business kingdom. When energy and strength desert, the hitherto dominatingly articulated leader becomes vulnerable and eventually withdrawn by his or her intent or others' intent. This change is not really supportive to an organization. This is not a personal loss to the leader, but a greater loss to the organizations and societies, because the wisdom has only become silent. It has not gone. The wisdom still remains. With the silence of the much knowledgeable leaders, the organizations will face certain voids. Vocal need not mean knowledgeable. Silent does not mean spent force. Formal retirement does not mean inability to contribute. Wisdom will always increase with age and experience. One would, for example, wish that social stalwarts continue to energize the political arena and that corporate veterans would be as articulate as ever in the corporate arena. Ideally, even when lions become silent, their wisdom can and must speak for the larger good. In this respect, we cannot think of no greater example than Dr. Abdul Kalam, who moved out of the term of the President of India, but he continued to share his wisdom. He never remained silent. And the world also said that please come and teach us, Master. The world said to the great president, the people's president. That's how silent wisdom will continue to be beneficial to organizations even after the so-called formal term ends. Forceful speakers would never have to regret that the force would never desert them so long as they build wisdom through the years. And that comes through meditative reflection. Force is expressed through minor interactions, written communications, and even through silent presence. Indian mythology is replete with examples of wise sages who conveyed more through their silence, that is dhyana, akin to meditation, than through vocal sermons. Lifetime speakers delivering valuable content as opposed to mere speeches would automatically become the dhyana gurus, whose wisdom speaks for itself despite their silence. Some of the greatest epics and songs of Indian culture have been conveyed through word of mouth propagation by disciples who were moved by the content. So, meditative reflection, valued wisdom, radiating silence, diffusing wisdom. What a wonderful cycle of knowledge diffusion that could occur. In contemporary society as well, meaningful content would speak for itself, even long after the roaring voices fall silent. Followers can become leaders, spreading the wise messages of the leaders. Silence speaks, and silence will always remain as the most powerful speech of responsible, sensible, and sensitive leaders. Effective speeches in the ultimate analysis are not made of either roaring ferocity or energetic passion. Aggression and energy certainly carry the day for the speaker and may even secure the desired outcomes from the teams for that day, but cannot leave lasting legacies without thematic content. It is not for no reason that the nuggets of wisdom in the speeches of Swami Vivekananda, Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, and John F. Kennedy have been preserved in and for posterity. The voices of great leaders may have gone silent, but their words have not. Such is the eternal power of content that has messages that last across generations. Organizations, societies, and nations are moved less by mountains of words and are inspired more by succinct messages of evocative thought and lasting value. You see here the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, May-August 1924, and the wisdom of Swami Vivekananda. Nations, societies, and organizations are also moved less by a leader who sounds and acts lofty and larger than life, but are inspired more by one who feels like one of them. So let me propose a framework of silent leadership wisdom. While truly charismatic leaders could be few, it pays for every competent individual to discover the charismatic components one is blessed with and work on them. These constitute the DNA of the speeches. So the silent wisdom could be seen in terms of high energy passion, which is helpful but not essential. Thematic content, so essential to appeal in a sustainable manner. Evocative thought that appeals to logic creates lasting value. Being one with the team ensures togetherness. Wisdom gets reflected by speeches that are special. So the silent wisdom or the wisdom of the great leaders is purposeful, creative, meaningful, logical, authentic, relevant, impactful, executable, and strategic. The power of the leader involves listening to the multitudes with connectivity and feeling the pulse of the organization and society for the leader to be able to respond with focus and empathy. The essence of an effective speech therefore lies in it being purposeful, creative, meaningful, logical, authentic, relevant, impactful, and most importantly, executable. So imagine the requirements of an effective speech. The role of the leader who develops and delivers the speech does not end with meeting the immediate objectives but begins with leaving lasting impressions. While energy, enthusiasm, and passion make for a lively speech, it is important that the central message itself springs to life to the audience and embeds itself in each member's inner self. And for that reason, if one were to have a script so that the message is coherent, cohesive, and capable of getting communicated, one should not shy away from having a script. Speech doesn't become great just because it is delivered on extempore. The speech becomes great because it has content, it is delivered with authenticity and passion, with sincerity and diligence, and because it has logic and rationality. And finally, because it is connecting emotionally and emotively with the audience. These are the hallmarks of the speech. And if such a speech needs to be backed by written content, so be it. It doesn't in any way distract the importance of speech. It is not so much about how the speech has been delivered, but what has been delivered as the central theme that impacts the listeners' lives. So a good speech must exemplify genuine ownership of the problems and solutions, which means it should be well thought out, should be rational, should be concise, should be cohesive. It should display the concern for changing the fortunes of the organization and improving the lives of the listeners. When this emotional angle is taken care of, the speech looks, feels, and becomes rational, logical, and makes the audience and leader part of one society. Wisdom does not emerge magically when the road fades. It gets accumulated and compounded over the years and decades to speak for itself when the time comes. So, wisdom is an accumulation all through our careers, and that should not be made silent. The term may become silent, but the wisdom itself cannot be silent. It should always spread the knowledge of wisdom. Let's take a philosophical view on silence. Silence as a concept has philosophical undertones. While some may view silence as being disconnected with the world, silence has other meanings too. Leaders feel that expression is meaningful when it is accompanied by an ability to act. If the leader is unable to act, such a leader is unlikely to be vocal. That explains the silence of leaders out of harness. And we are saying that such leaders must actually be respected and brought back into the mainstream, at least in respect of expressing the wisdom. So there are four views of silence. The professional view, which says one should speak only when one can act. The social view, speaking is a matter of personal freedom. The theological view, abstinence from talking is a penance. The reformist view, silence is a way of passive protest. Reflective leaders consider silence as an experience of reflective meditation and a recognition that it is up to the new leaders and the larger organization to take the benefit of wisdom by drawing out the silent leaders. The many aspects of communication that have been considered so far are so physical and so philosophical. They are so intellectual and they are so emotional. So you must keep all of these things in mind. Leaders have the freedom and responsibility of communicating with sensibility and sensitivity. Leaders have also the freedom of being dominating in communication or just being silent. Each has a specific import, as we discussed, whether to be sensible, sensitive, dominating, silent. But it always is a help to be both sensible and sensitive, whatever be your personal leadership style. So deep observation, sharp discernment helps sensibility and sensitivity. One can toggle between domineering and silence, but you must always deploy the sensory signs to receive the feedback. And that feedback tells you what type of speaker you should be, what type of communicator you should be, and what type of influence you can generate as a leader. Speaking or being silent is a key leadership responsibility that has both professional and philosophical undertones, in harness or out of it. That is, whether in a formal term or out of a formal term. Leaders need to share their wisdom for their organization's benefit. While the leader is in harness, the responsibility devolves on the organization, and when out of harness, it devolves on the new leaders to bring out the best in their leaders. So this brings us to the first philosophical lecture on leadership. I'm sure you would have enjoyed it, and you would have enough time to reflect on some of the key aspects of this philosophical take on speech and communication, and the importance of leaders and followers getting connected together with virtuous feedback mechanisms and with virtuous delivery of communication messages, so that ultimately it all comes up for the lofty goal for responsible leadership. So let's meet in the next lecture.